It really is incredible to see where farmland was, this giant lake full on ecosystems. Now, it has reached its peak. It will slowly recede from here, but obviously roads like this are still impassable.
A massive freshwater lake once covered California's Central Valley before disappearing more than a century ago. Now, after 130 years, Tulare Lake has returned, flooding thousands of acres of farmland and exposing parts of the region long hidden beneath dry ground. But this is more than a rare flood. The lake's comeback is raising difficult questions about agriculture, forgotten indigenous history, and the growing struggle to control water in an unpredictable climate. How could a vanished lake suddenly return? And what does its reappearance mean for the people living there today? The return of a lost lake. In the spring of 2023, something extraordinary happened in California's southern Central Valley. After more than 130 years of absence, Tulare Lake, once the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River, began to reappear, flooding over 100,000 acres of farmland that had been built on its ancient bed. This was not a small or isolated event. The rapidly rising water overwhelmed irrigation canals, breached levees, and forced emergency evacuations of livestock and residents. It was as if the landscape was insisting, against human effort, to reclaim what was always its natural low point. The sudden return of this lake stunned farmers, local officials, and residents who had long accepted the lake's disappearance as a permanent fact. Many were unprepared for the sheer scale of flooding and damage. Crops that once yielded millions in revenue were drowned beneath the waters, and infrastructure essential to the agricultural industry was either lost or severely damaged. The economic toll quickly rose into the hundreds of millions, with no clear end in sight as the floodwaters stretched across the basin. But beyond economic losses, the resurfacing of water in a place that hadn't seen a lake for over a century posed deeper questions. How could a lake simply come back after generations of drainage and cultivation? What forces were at work beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively, that made this possible? Residents began to realize the lake's return wasn't an accident, but a signal that the terrain and its hydrology had never truly been defeated. Despite the widespread disruption, the return of Tulare Lake also unveiled a hidden chapter of history buried beneath the farmland. Erosion by floodwaters started to reveal remnants of long-forgotten settlements, artifacts, and natural features that spoke of a vastly different past. These emergences startled many and hinted that what was lost might never be gone for good. Pieces of a story deeply connected to indigenous people and extinct wildlife were suddenly resurfacing. The water's return also exposed vulnerabilities in the systems built to manage California's water. The complex web of canals, pumping stations, and levees in place was overwhelmed by volumes of water far exceeding their design limits. These systems had been engineered based on an assumption that Tulare Lake was gone forever, yet the landscape beneath had not changed. Natural forces such as gravity still guided water to flow downhill, right back to its original basin. As emergency responses unfolded, it became clear that this event was not merely about weather or mismanagement. It embodied a clash between human engineering and natural hydrology, showing what happens when long-term environmental changes collide with short-term human expectations. The sight of water spreading across cotton fields and dairy operations was evidence that nature's memory ran deeper than settlements or property lines. For many communities, the return of Tulare Lake was a disruptive force they never imagined facing. But for others, particularly the Tachi Yokut tribe, whose ancestors lived alongside the lake for thousands of years, it was a profound moment of reckoning. The lake's resurgence stirred complex emotions, reviving memories and histories that had been suppressed for over a century. The lake was not just water, it was history, culture, and identity flowing back into the present. The questions hanging over the region remain urgent. Will the lake recede and fade into a memory once again? Or is this the start of a new chapter where the land insists on returning to its natural state? What has been buried will not stay hidden, and what returns with the water could reshape the future of this critical corner of California. No matter how powerful the forces that drained the lake once seemed, even stronger forces lie beneath and around it, waiting quietly for their moment to be heard again. The lake that disappeared. Tulare Lake existed as the main geographic feature of California's southern Central Valley territory before agricultural fields were established. The lake reached its maximum size of 790 square miles during its peak, which made it larger than both present-day Lake Tahoe and the Great Salt Lake of that time. The terminal basin of this extensive freshwater lake received water from rivers, which included the Kings, Kaweah, Tule, and Kern, but lost water only through the process of evaporation. The lake expanded and contracted following natural cycles of drought and flood for thousands of years. The natural rhythm created an extensive wetland ecosystem which it maintained. The lake, together with its marshes, served as a home for numerous species, which included fish that depended on the lake's specific chemical composition and large groups of waterfowl. Early European explorers reported that the skies became darker because of migratory birds who occupied the areas which Thule elk and grizzly bears used as their natural habitats. The wildlife population reached an extraordinary level which turned the basin into one of the most ecologically diverse regions situated west of the Mississippi River. The Yokut people, who included the Tachi Yokut tribe, established their community around this lake because they relied on wetland resources for their daily existence. The population estimates indicate that thousands of Yokut people inhabited this area, which became one of the most populous indigenous areas throughout North America. The group used weirs and nets for fishing while they practiced sustainable waterfowl hunting and constructed their boats and homes through tule reed collection from marshes. The lake functioned as a resource which served people through its role as their economic base and sacred place of worship. The active operating ecosystem, together with the human-developed environment, started to disappear during the 1800s. The state of California became a state after which the gold rush brought many people who started extensive agriculture development, which led to increased efforts to drainage the lake. The Kings River, Kaweah River, Tule River, and Kern River water diversions redirected river water into irrigation canals, which led to a gradual reduction of water supply to the basin. The period from 1850 to 1890 saw a rapid increase in wetland area destruction through levee construction and agricultural expansion, which resulted in the loss of millions of acres. The lake experienced complete disappearance by the beginning of the 20th century. The process proved fast because the western United States' largest freshwater lake disappeared within 5 decades. The lakebed underwent leveling operations which transformed it into agricultural land, while the adjoining wetlands and wildlife areas faced destruction. The lake lost its entire fish population because of multiple species extinctions, which included the Tulare Lake sardine, the first recorded fish extinction in modern American history. Indigenous people lost everything important to them. The Tachi Yokut and their neighboring tribes lost their traditional territories because agricultural fields covering cotton and alfalfa crops spread across their lands. Their people faced a drastic population drop because of 3 factors, which included disease outbreaks, forced removal from their home areas, and the destruction of their natural environment. The agricultural industry, which J.G. Boswell Company operated, turned the newly accessible lakebed into one of the United States' top cotton production areas. The lake's story was not finished, and its return would prove that even the most thorough reshaping of a landscape could not erase nature's persistence. A thriving ecosystem erased. Before a Tulare Lake was drained, it was not just a body of water, but the center of a vast, intricate ecosystem that sustained an abundance of life. The wetlands surrounding the lake provided critical breeding and feeding grounds for millions of migratory birds traveling along the Pacific Flyway, one of the most important bird migration routes in North America. Flocks of ducks, geese, and other waterfowl were so large they reportedly darkened the skies during migration seasons, a spectacle that is unimaginable in today's much-altered landscape. The lake's waters were home to unique aquatic species that evolved in isolation. The Tulare Lake sardine and the thick-tailed chub were fish found nowhere else on Earth, perfectly adapted to the lake's specific conditions. With the disappearance of the lake, these species were among the first modern extinctions recorded in an American freshwater system. This loss of biodiversity was only the beginning of a broader ecological collapse that followed. Surrounding the lake, tule reeds thrived, providing raw materials essential to the indigenous Yokut people. These reeds were used to build boats, houses, and tools, shaping a way of life intimately connected to the land and water. The wetlands also supported populations of Tulare elk, a species hunted to near extinction after habitat loss and hunting pressures mounted. Grizzly bears, once seen along the lake's shores, were completely wiped out in the region, all part of the devastating impact of ecological transformation. The density and sophistication of the indigenous people living around Tulare Lake were remarkable. Population estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Yokut people lived here, including the Tachi, Wu, Chunut, and Tulamni tribes. These communities did not merely survive on the edge of subsistence. They flourished in large, stable villages supported by the lake's resources. They harvested fish, hunted waterfowl sustainably, and managed the wetlands with deep knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. The arrival of Europeans and American settlers brought catastrophic changes. Diseases like smallpox and influenza decimated indigenous populations before significant settlement even began, reducing Yokut numbers by an estimated 90% or more. With the imposition of irrigation projects and agricultural land conversion, the landscape that had supported such abundant life was crushed beneath levees, drained soils, and plowed fields. Wildlife fled or died out, and the great waterfowl migrations shifted to the few surviving wetlands along the Pacific Flyway. Indigenous peoples became increasingly marginalized, both physically and culturally. The rich tapestry of life and human culture that had thrived for millennia was replaced by industrial-scale agriculture built on the bones of what had been erased. The memory of a mighty lake and the life it supported refuses to fade quietly beneath the surface, setting the stage for both revelation and reckoning. The atmospheric rivers and flood of 2023. The 2023 Tulare Lake restoration happened because of an unusual weather pattern that created more rainfall than past weather patterns. The Pacific Ocean delivered intense moisture through 31 atmospheric river events that hit California from late December 2022 until spring. The storms delivered massive quantities of rain and snow to the Sierra Nevada mountains, which resulted in the highest snowpack level ever documented in California history. The snow, which fell in southern Sierra Nevada during springtime 2023, reached between 250% and 300% of the typical snowfall amounts which occurred historically. The huge snowpack melted down because of rising temperatures, and this process caused rivers to receive an enormous water flow which had once supplied Tulare Lake. The current irrigation and flood control systems, which operated at lower capacity than the present water levels, faced immediate failure when water began to pour in unexpectedly. The canals experienced flooding and the levees suffered breaches, which resulted in water flowing downwards directly into the area which had been deserted for the lake. The basin remained unchanged in its physical landforms during the entire period of 100 years, which followed the start of agricultural activities. Water moved through gravitational force until it reached the lowest point, which had been established as the original lake basin floor. The water flow exceeded the capacity of the irrigation systems, which caused Tulare Lake to start rebuilding itself across a territory that reached 10,000 acres. At its highest point, the water covered between 100,000 and 180,000 acres, which represented a smaller area than its historical size, yet remained larger than any area which had been observed after the 1800s. The agricultural system, which operated on land that experts believed to be permanently dry, faced its most devastating impact from the flooding disaster. The floodwaters completely submerged the fields, which contained cotton, alfalfa, and other crops, resulting in the loss of products and machinery worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The dairy industry, which operates in this basin, faced an immediate emergency because it required moving more than 50,000 cattle from flooded feedlots through a complex operation that lasted for several weeks. The emergency situation worsened when small towns and communities such as Corcoran faced major flooding. A geological phenomenon which remained hidden from most observers until the flood emergency began created a new danger for the affected area. The lake bed of Corcoran has experienced sinking since the 1920s because groundwater pumping activities have continued for several decades and resulted in land subsidence that reached 11.5 feet. The sinking of the area created dangerous flooding conditions which hindered efforts to protect vital infrastructure. The land beneath the surface experienced constant changes which turned the area into a dangerous situation. The flood disaster affected every established community, including Allensworth, which became an African-American settlement during the early 1900s. The floodwaters destroyed the State Historic Park, which now stands abandoned, as all efforts to preserve it suffered complete destruction from the widespread disaster. Multiple federal disaster declarations were issued as counties struggled to manage the ongoing crisis. The emergency response efforts lasted for months after the flood disaster started, which showed how extensive the flood disaster was and how difficult it was to manage. The floodwaters were only the beginning. Their movement across the basin began carving through the layers of soil and sediment deposited since the lake's draining, revealing something far older beneath. What resurfaced beneath the water? As floodwaters swept across the former lake bed, they began uncovering traces of a past buried for over a century. Erosion cut through layers of agricultural overburden, soil, crop residue, and man-made deposits, exposing remnants of the original lake floor. In scattered spots, this gradual unveiling revealed archaeological materials linked to the ancient Yokut people who had lived alongside the lake for thousands of years. The shorelines of historic Tulare Lake once contained village sites, fish weirs, and bedrock mortars used for grinding acorns and seeds. These artifacts, essential to understanding the indigenous culture and their sustainable relationship with the environment, had remained hidden beneath plowed fields all this time. The floodwaters effectively reopened access to this archaeological record, though details have been carefully protected by the Tachi Yokut tribe to prevent looting and disturbance of sacred sites. Beyond the indigenous heritage, remnants of the agricultural history buried beneath the lake bed also emerged. Abandoned farmsteads, archaic machinery from pre-mechanization eras, and infrastructure abandoned during industry consolidation began rising to the surface. These glimpses into the rural past painted a layered history of human occupation, both the deep traditional past and the more recent industrial farming legacy. As this submerged world revealed itself, wildlife responded to the return of water. Within months, migratory birds found their way back to the newly formed wetlands, reestablishing routes along the Pacific Flyway. Ducks, geese, and other waterfowl instinctively arrived at a body of water none had seen in living memory, but whose call they instinctively followed. Fish populations also returned, some traveling from connected waterways, and others introduced inadvertently through irrigation sources. The beginnings of ecosystem recovery, although disrupted and incomplete, were unmistakable. For the Tachi Yokut tribe, witnessing Pahashi, their ancestral name for Tulare Lake, return was deeply emotional. Tribal leaders expressed a complex mix of grief for what has been lost, vindication for the resilience of their homeland, and spiritual connection to a lake that sustained their people for 8,000 years. Despite centuries of forced removal and cultural erasure, the lake's comeback was a profound reminder that the land and water remember what human hands tried to erase. The land beneath the water carries stories that refuse to be silenced, signaling that California's future will have to reckon with both the past and the present in ways previously unimagined. The reemergence of ancient waters stitched the fabric of history with the present, compelling a new reckoning with the land's true nature and the lives it has sustained. The future of Tulare Basin. The restoration of Tulare Lake demands that California develop new strategies for Tulare Basin survival during upcoming climate extreme events. People maintained their belief that the lake had disappeared permanently for over 100 years, which resulted in the construction of farms and canals and flood systems based on that false assumption. The 2023 floods demonstrated that the lake still existed because it revealed the natural history of the region. Scientists predict that climate change will create extended drought periods, which will be followed by intense flooding events that increase the likelihood of the lake returning. The groundwater crisis, which affects the basin, continues to escalate without any signs of improvement. The sustainability laws of California require farmers to set aside vast portions of their farmland, which raises discussions about whether specific areas of the basin should be restored to their original wetland and natural lakebed conditions. The existing levee and flood control systems in the region face major challenges because their design excludes a scenario where the lake returns. Tulare Basin now functions as a strong demonstration that nature can restore areas which people believed they had permanently transformed. The future status of the lake as a temporary or permanent body of water will depend on climate conditions and water management regulations and the complex decisions that California will make throughout the upcoming years. Tulare Lake's return after 130 years is a powerful reminder that nature's forces often outlast human plans. The lake revived history, wildlife, and landscapes believed lost, signaling a future where old boundaries may no longer hold. If you found this story eye-opening, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most compelling environmental stories.